I know I said we would start this next tutorial by sewing on the eyes, but I started thinking, we should probably do something about all this. So let's go ahead and sew down these ears first. If you decided to just leave them moving freely, then you won't have some of these yarn tails. But you can still check out this technique and use it for any of your other amigurumi projects.
To stitch down the ears, I recommend using a bend tip darning needle, and having a few stitch markers will also come in handy, because before we start sewing anything, it's a good idea to kind of lay out the path that our needle's going to take. So let's start with that first ear. The yarn tail is exiting the ear above round 17, and we need to imagine a straight line to the other side of the ear. This line is going to run across a few rounds, so putting a stitch marker in what should be round 14 will help. Now let's put a stitch marker in round 14 just above that yarn tail. Imagine a straight line running across those rounds, ending on the opposite side of that ear, and put a stitch marker there too. We're going to make the mattress stitch by zigzagging up and down between these two lines that we've just marked out. Let's do the second ear. Again, your yarn tail should be exiting above row 17 of this ear. Count over to row 14 and then follow that round all the way to the left. Put a stitch marker there. I know this might be odd because we're counting down from 17 to 14 and moving up the ear, but remember, we started crocheting this ear at the very tip, working towards the head. Place another stitch marker at the start of round 14, just above the stitch where the yarn tail is exiting. Now count over to round 8 and follow it all the way to the left and put a stitch marker there. When we are done with the mattress stitch, these two lines will come together and the ear will remain sewn down. Alright, let's get that needle threaded onto the yarn tail of that first ear. We need to make a knot because it's going to create an anchor for us. So insert your needle through the stitch closest to where that tail is exiting and make a knot. We can begin making the mattress stitch now. Take note of how I'm careful to not go through both sides of the ear. You just want to go underneath that first row. Here's where stitch markers come in handy. Insert your needle into the stitch you marked just to the left of where your yarn is coming out of. You want the needle to enter the bottom and exit towards the other two stitch markers. Don't worry about pulling too tight. We'll take care of that later at the end. We will continue weaving the needle and the tail between these two lines we marked out with our stitch markers. Remember to always enter the bottom and exit the top towards the other end. You won't always go through a stitch. Sometimes you'll weave the needle between stitches and rounds. Having those stitch markers should give you a guide so you head in that general direction that we're going for. I know if I didn't have those stitch markers as a guide, I wouldn't have a clue around how to weave this tail through. I find it more difficult to backtrack and rip out the yarn tail, so just take your time and be sure about where you put your needle. As I weave in this tail, I'm also trying to make my stitches close to each other. It's okay if you don't finish exactly where you put your stitch markers, you just need to be close enough. Hopefully you end with your tail coming out that top line. We need to pull this yarn tail tight so it pulls down the ear. Be careful not to pull too tight. You could break the yarn or cinch up the ear a little bit too much and then it'll curl funny. Let's finish this off by making a knot near that last stitch we made. Once that's done, I like to take that tail through the ear towards the center of the head. I'm pushing my needle between the mattress stitch we just created. Now I'm going to go down the ear into the head and come out towards the back, where you would imagine the dog's neck to be. As you pull the tail through the head, don't pull too much or you could pull the ear out of position. I like to leave this tail hanging around. You'll see why after we finish sewing down the second ear. So let's go do that now. Remember, we're going to weave zigzag between these two lines that we've marked out. But before we do, let's make that anchor and tie a knot close to where that tail is coming out of. Follow those invisible lines we created, going through the bottom and coming out the top towards the other end of the ear. This is the same thing we just did, so I'm going to speed it up just a bit. You should end with your tail coming out near round 8 of the ear. Then pull that tail tight to fold that ear over. Be sure to pull everything through. You should see that the two lines have come together and now you're done. Make a knot close to that last stitch on round 8 of the ear before weaving the tail towards the center of the head. You want to take the tail down the head and come out the same stitch where the other tail is exiting. I like to knot these two together and then tuck that knot into the head before cutting the tails. But save those tails because we can use them later.
I hope this tutorial was clear. And remember, you can use this technique to hold other things in place like arms, legs, tails, anything you want. Next time, we'll take care of this and tack down that nose. I promise. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back for the rest of the pattern. Thanks for watching.